governance committee discussion, I want you to give you an update on where we are at this point and get some guidance from my colleagues on how to proceed from this point and on. In spite of all the hard work done by committee members, that we have not quite completed governance committee's work. As to the standing committee, we have not even begun the discussion of that, thinking that we wanted to do advisory committee discussion first, because standing committee is not something that board has an exclusive control over. But for the advisory committees, that as we would need to get some feedback, talk with the advisory committees and get their feedback, we wanted to tackle that issue first. So standing committee, just wait until we are done with that. On the advisory committees, on some of the issues, governance committee was able to come up with a consensus on, but there are some other issues that there's no consensus. But at least because of a timeline, if you remember the timeline, the board adopted that since we are supposed to get back to advisory committee, respective advisory committees to get their further feedback and bring into a full day work session in May for sort of like a finalizing and have a vote taken by the first meeting in June, and have a new advisory committee appointments made by the end of June. So that we are sort of behind at this point. So what to bring to my colleagues' attention as to where we are and see how we should proceed. Okay, there are a number of advisory committees, as you all know, close to about 10, and there are certain committees which are legally required and also legally required to report to the school board. There are some committees which are legally required, but not necessarily required to report to the board. So CTEAC, Career and Technical Advisory Committee, is one of those committees that are legally required and must report to the board. So there's nothing we can do about, so we'll leave that on. And same thing with the ACSD, it's legally required to report to the board. Fully CAG is actually a sort of optional, but Fairfax County Public School has for many, many years decided to have fully CAG Family Life Education Advisory Committee, and for development of a curriculum for implementation just for Fairfax, rather than using a state-developed curriculum. So the consensus from the governance committee was basically leave that alone as is. And then we'll go to, if you go further down, Madam Clerk, there are Title I, Parent Advisory Committee and Family, and that's a FCPS and Head Start. And that advisory committee, the consensus was those were sort of legally required. I think there is a government funding associated with that for us to have, but they are not necessarily have to report to the full board. So so long as they could have an interaction with our staff to work together, we satisfy the legal requirements. So consensus of the governance committee was those two committees will work with the staff members rather than coming to the full board. The rest of the committees, there's no consensus at this point. So we want to see how our colleagues want to go from that point on up. I don't know why that's not, but I have the list of names of those. Let me just give you a complete where we are. On Citizen Advisory Committee members, as you know, that advisory committees have many, many members serving on. It's not just school board member appointed community members to serve, including the one appointed by student representative to school board, but there are staff members, there are sort of community organization representatives to serve on those committees. We have not really, governance committee has not really had a time to look at each of the committee's members' composition. So where the consensus was, at the minimum, we're going to have 13 members on each advisory committee so that all board members could appoint one and along with the student representative's appointment. And then for each advisory committee, the governance committee wanted to just bring to the full board, full board discussion and how we should add, how many more members do you want to add to each advisory committee. And then if you go further down, Madam Clerk, this is sort of like how we, mechanics of bringing reports to the full board in a timeline is, as you recall, as you remember, that we do have like 4 nights in June, where we bring all our committees, I think mostly 3 committees per night, to present us with a report and have a discussion. And over the summer, the staff works on the staff's responses and give their responses to board members and also share with advisory committees. And then you generally stopped right there without having further discussion. And there are certain downside to that, many of the advisory committees feel that board need to have a further, sit down with maybe advisory committees and have a further discussion on some of the important issues. So what the governance committee has agreed to present to the full board for consideration is, rather than doing all the presentation in June, spread it to 2 months. June, I know it's going into even July. Probably more meetings for us and more work on the part of advisory committees too. Now they have another month to work as community volunteers, but do it in the month of June and July. And rather than having 3 committee presentations, limited to 2 each night. So we'll have more meetings for them too. But they will also allow us more time for discussion, and at the same time, as long as it is possible, ask staff to append their responses to advisory committee's recommendations and present those at the same time, as much as practicable. And board members, they will give board members and also advisory committee members an opportunity to see and the staff's responses and have an opportunity to discuss staff's responses as well at that time. Obviously, by limiting the committee presentations to no more than 2, we'll have more time to do that. So, for example, rather than just only giving each committee 20 minutes for presentation and have probably another 20 minutes for discussion or half an hour for discussion, we can have, if we can set aside 3 hours per night, we have 90 minutes for each advisory committee's presentation and discussion. That's where we were. And is there anything missing?
So one of the things I just wanted to add when we were talking about the membership, starting at 13 and then deciding from there, the key reason is in some of the conversations that some of us have had with the advisory committees, we know with 12 board members and a student representative, it's hard for us to have robust dialogue and meaningful dialogue. And so some of these advisory committees are 25, 30, even 35 people, and it's really unwieldy. So we talked about the fact that there are right now many FCPS staff members who serve on it. And it's good because, they want to provide some insight, but we do actually have a vehicle through Dr. Garza and her leadership team directing us every day on what they think is good for operations. So if you have a staff member who serves as a liaison, they can, certainly bring someone who's a subject matter expert to speak to whatever the committee's working on, but it really allows the community stakeholders whose viewpoints we're trying to bring forward in addition to what we already have from our superintendent to inform the board. And so we just thought this would be a way to not take as much time away from staff, because staff spend a lot of time on this. So, and then when Mr. Moon brings up which committees we still aren't sure about, I think that we can talk about that then.
Any other governance committee members to chime in on Okay, with that, I have Miss Evans and Miss Kellen Corbett Sanders.
Okay, I would just say that one piece of my
Just
advocacy.
if you keep in mind, I don't want to limit your comments to any issues, but governance committee is basically seeking the guidance on how to proceed from this point on.
Okay. And so my advocacy is that with the School Health Advisory Committee, they do very substantive work. And even though it's not technically a required committee, there is in the state law, it's like the FLECAC, it's a may. And so but I think that does give it kind of a more of a sense that the state expects us to have that. So I think for both of those reasons, I would want to see that stay in as one of our advisory committees. So that's my advocacy on that. I would. Is your vision with the reporting that the two committees that would now go to the superintendent, would they still report to us, or would they no longer report to us?
They will no longer report.
They would no longer report to us. Okay, so that would reduce the number of reports that we would get, and I think that's probably reasonable. So I think that's a good change. Last thing I would say is we might even want to spread the reports out even more. There are times of the year when we are really in a slower period, and we might want to see about the possibility of having some committees reported at a particularly slow period.
I mean, like if the advisory committees have to do their work, it will take time. So, I mean, do you expect any months other than June or July for them to be able to report?
I think we should open our minds to that rather than having several evening meetings in June and July. May is a very busy month. June can be a very busy month as well. So, I could see a situation where an advisory committee might be given a charge and be given more than a year to do it. And then perhaps come to us in October if we don't have a lot going on. We could have a regular schedule. We could even have them report at a regular work session.
Okay. And I have Corbett Sanders.
I guess I'm a little perplexed as to what is the problem we're trying to solve exactly. It is on. I'm trying to be sensitive to it being too loud earlier. So I'm a little perplexed as to what is the problem we're trying to solve with the restructuring, because I'm particularly sensitive to the value that our citizen representatives have on these committees in keeping me informed of issues and being a source of advice and consult when we are so short-staffed ourselves in doing work that it's very helpful to have our advisory committee representatives. And I happen to spend a certain amount of time every month talking to the various advisory committee members that have been appointed by Supervisor Stork, but Member Stork last year. Additionally, your recommendation for the Title I Parent Advisory and the Early Childhood Education, I am particularly concerned about this as the school board member with a significant number of Title I schools that I would like to have that committee provide at least on a yearly basis, but this is one of those examples of it would not necessarily have to be June and July, but that it would be helpful to have them brief the whole board, because I believe that especially with the early childhood education, that is so important to the overall success long term of all of our students, that we should have that feedback. And then with the Title I, if you don't want to bring it to the whole board, maybe you just have them present to those school board members that have a significant number of Title I schools, because it does have a significant impact on our population. Okay,
before I go to two board members, let me put down the name. There are Fairfax and Strauss. Dr. Garza, you've been with us for now almost 3 years, having gone through a couple of yearly presentations about Title I, FCPS, Title I and FCPS. Could you share with especially newly elected board members what are the things being reported by those committees to the school board? Do you recall?
If I remember correctly, it's how do we engage parents? So the Title I, there are a lot of legal requirements the Title I committee has to check off, and one of those is parent engagement, parent involvement. So if I recall correctly, there was a lot of focus on, from the Title I advisory, the things that they were doing to engage parents in new and different ways. Interestingly, I believe that some of you, I think, even noted there was some overlap in those two presentations. We had them on the same night, and they were actually sharing some of the same work. I think we saw also some overlap with the Human Relations Committee and another committee too. I can't remember what it was.
MSAOC.
MSAOC, yes. So there does tend to be some overlap in some of the discussion that we received, but I recall correctly, it was a lot of focus on engaging parents at the school level for both of those. FCPS, is that correct, Steve? That's pretty darn good. I'm impressed.
Okay. Mr. Narcofax to be followed by Mrs. Strauss and then Madam and then Ms. Hines.
Okay, well, first of all, I feel we're doing a very big disservice to ourselves. This is very late. I can barely think. We have been here 8 hours now. And if this is going to be a big deal, I would really say we need to talk about this discussion at a later time. I have very similar concerns to Karen Corbett Sanders. We're seeing now with we are seeing now, seeing now, but you heard see now, see what's happening, it's much too late. The concentration of poverty is not distributed evenly over Fairfax County. And if we take out this and it just reports directly to the staff, the board members that don't see it in their areas are not going to continue to understand and see our problems, and they are impactful to our schools. And so I would highly recommend that those reports continuing to come to the board. I don't know if we're advocating for, which ones we want. I think you guys have a very difficult agenda before you. One of the ones, I guess I'll just put my plug in, advanced academic programs. I don't think anything should be done to that particular one, just as Ms. Evans said she didn't think anything should be done to human relations. Which one was it? SHAC, student health. Yes. So, advanced academics used to be mandated by state, no longer is. But it's another May. So, that's my advocacy right now. And I guess that puts us right back to where we have been.
Thank you. We always an option.
Well, yes, Dr. Garza just mentioned to me, how do you want these reports done? That was what I didn't answer for you all. And we have to spread them out. Again, that's a disservice the way we're doing that. It is so much information on one night. And I do think the staff follow-up, I like that recommendation where the staff follow-up has to be more timely after the report. And I think by spreading them out, that will allow staff's work to be a little bit more spread out as well.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say that we have an option not to change any committee structure. That's an option. But at least, from a governance committee chair, I was hoping that at least we'll have something to take back to advisory committees, because now they know that we are discussing this, and they'll want to know where we are. Mrs. Strauss?
I'm not eager to do a lot of aggressive changing. Usually the committees have an opportunity to do some pruning Often the other countywide groups or what have you come with important advice that actually comes to us, and from time to time, I don't know that we have to approve changes in groups for them, but they will say, this particular group is really defunct, they don't come anymore. Human relations is always one. Right, yeah, and so instead of having this group, this is another group of citizens who have organized, and they have important things to contribute. So, allowing them, if they feel their committee is too large and they can't get a quorum, well, then they need to change who's coming, because there are lots of new ideas and different demographics. The one concern that years ago when we paired the committees in threes, part of it was to help the committees also hear the different groups, so that the Title I and the FCPS could be heard by perhaps in the olden days, gifted groups. So it was not only for the school board to see a range, but it was also for the committees to see the range of needs. It was a great opportunity. And I always liked that. If we want to spread the stuff out, that's good. But there's an important learning process, not only for the school board, but for the groups as well, so that you understand the range of needs across the county that we need to address. I think it would be interesting for some of the committees, because the staff helps the committees actually write the reports, and I think it's almost like an audit where you have the report, and then you have sort of staff's response. I think that would make it more streamlined. So I'm not so eager to get rid of any, and I would like to be able to hear from the Title I and FCPS people each year. I think that's an important part of our community. So I learn from them every year.
Okay, I have a Ms. Hines to be followed by Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, thank you guys for this work. It's really hard, and you're trying to chunk it and bite off as much as you can. I think that's great. The reporting changes, I like the reporting changes that you've recommended. I think try the June and July and see if it's better. On the FCPS and Title I, I've been the liaison to both of those over the years, and they do good work, but I wonder if we could kind of maybe make everybody happy by saying that school board members who are interested I don't know how the reporting would go to staff, whether it would actually be a meeting where the FCPS and Title I folks would report physically to you, or if it would be more of a written report. But if there were a way that those school board members who are interested could participate in hearing the report, that would just be my thought. If that works, I don't know if it does.
Dr. Gaja?
And then the other on the existing other 6 advisory committees, I was just wondering, as you go forward to have this conversation, I know that, for example, MSAOC has many more than 13 members, right? I mean, because they have not only our reps, but reps from NAACP and other organizations. So I guess you'll have to grapple with, do we then make sure that, when I name a rep, if we're going to go to 13 members, then I name someone who has to be from NAACP, or do we make an exception for a committee like that?
Okay. Dr. Gaja, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Marino. I apologize. I had a conflict at the last governance meeting. We were with the teacher organizations. But did you all think about whether or not the reports could happen like in September or October?
Yes, we discussed that.
Oh, y'all did discuss that? Because June, July is actually toward the spring and end of the years when we're more packed. And then oftentimes y'all will lament a little bit in the early fall because we're less demand, because of the normal ebb and flow of the work. And then it does get in front of budget. Then we would know in the fall if there's some budget implications for some of the recommendations. So just a thought, and I apologize I was not there, and
sure,
I don't want to.
That could be an option too. September, October timeframe when our workload is lighter, and obviously we have to be mindful of terms of their appointments generally end June 30th. That's why we used to have that by the end of June. But we should bring them back, or we can change those as well. Okay. With that in mind, Mr. Schultz.
So that was perfect, because what I was going to ask is, could we just do rolling reports? Like, why do all the reports have to happen at the same time of year? Couldn't we just stage it so that, we roll throughout the year? I mean, it's annual work. Who cares when it's annually reported back to us? Two, while I appreciate the notion of something like a Title I school issue being presented to all of us, we also don't have, I'd love for us to have a, impact of overcrowded schools and overcrowded classrooms report presented to all of us so that everybody else would understand the problems that my families face. But that doesn't happen. And so, the struggle is to have all 12 of us sit there. If I don't have a Title I school, I understand the impact of Title I. And so I do think that potentially driving the audience makes the content more salient for the recipients. So I'm potentially in favor of that. I'm not sure I understand the concept of not doing that much change. I think that I thought the idea was to try to maybe streamline our work, move some of it a little bit over into operations side, and maybe align some of the work that we're doing more with the strategic plan. So I'm not exactly sure why we wouldn't embrace some change. I didn't follow that line of thought. So.
Okay, Ms. Patrick.
Thank you. I think my thought is a little bit along the lines of what Ms. Hines is trying to get at as well. Can maybe, and I do think some change is needed to have more effectiveness out of our committee structure. Can some of the committees that we maybe move to the superintendent? I know we haven't gotten to standing committees, but if there's a way for some of those that would no longer report to the whole board to maybe report to a standing committee, Title I, FCPS, Head Start, I think could very easily report to a committee. We can, closing achievement gap within student success, that kind of thing. If our committees start to get more involved, I know in the past it used to be much more kind of project-based committees. I think looking at a hybrid model that way, where those of us here can really focus on topics and become more experts on those topics that really interest us, and have advisory committees that report to us directly, I think.
That's a wonderful idea. Any other board member before I do go back?
Dalia, can you just expound on
I
that?
thought you want to go back.
Oh, I'm a go back? Oh, that's right. I spoke already. See now.
Okay, then I have 3 go backs. Ms. McLaughlin, and to be followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders and Sinaya.
So since we were trying to do this all kind of one fell swoop, I wish we just had the other committees where we were saying we weren't sure what to do with listed up there, because I think there was actually far more consensus. None of us had any question that MSAOC would continue to report to the board. Advanced academics, student, SHAC, Student Health Advisory Committee, ACSD that we had already talked about, legal. Those were we all went, yeah, it's fine. What I remember from the conversation is ACE, Adult Community Education, and HRASC, which is the Human Relations Advisory Committee. And we had conversation as a governance group that we're the 3rd largest employer in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we don't have a Human Resources Advisory Committee. That's not what human relations is. If you read the charter and you talk to the people, which I served as a liaison for them, some who've been on it, I think for how many decades it's operated, they're very firm that it was supposed to be about human relations, culture, diversity, blah, 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 blah. And then MSAOC was an outbirth of human relations. So if you read their charges over the last number of years, their work almost seems to duplicate MSAOC. So some of us have been advocating to bring to all of you, not to be decided tonight, but to start thinking about, would HRASC be better as a human resources one? And you could take some of the good, strong things out of HRASC and look at having a caring culture committee through the superintendents. You can capture some of that stuff. But so in the interest of time tonight, I guess I really just want to be really careful that I heard what people said about the richness of bringing people to the committees and how small. But the point of all this was for us to go back to our committees and talk to them. Because I have to tell you consistently what I hear from my appointees, my Braddock appointees, is that our committees are too large, that there is a little bit of, obviously, staff who are appointed and serve on it as members, but serve in the school system, they have a mindset. And so we already know what their mindset is. They report to Dr. Garza, who reports to us. We're trying to have community stakeholders tell us, thinking outside the box, and having a staff liaison, one person, so we're not taking multiple staff and multiple employee time for this, but having a liaison who says, that's a great idea, here's just keep in mind some of the requirements. You could still have somebody shepherding them on why this outlandish idea might not work. But I don't think we need to be having committees, and I know we do, that have a lot of employees on it too. And I think if we're not starting to think about doing this differently instead of how we've always done it, I do appreciate what Janie was saying, but no, I'm not a fan of just pruning with one or two here or there. I'm hearing from people saying what might have been a well-intentioned model in the past, it's bulky, it doesn't allow for robust conversation, and there are too many people on most of these committees. I'm not wholesale whacking them off so they're going to go down to 13, but I think we start at 13 and build up with a very mindful approach with the input from our committees. We might have more nimble, more robust work that comes out of them. And then this notion that could we do it throughout the year? I think certainly we could look to that model. We just have to remember then that we give them something to work on. So they might have come back and either they're going to report, as Ms. Schultz said, on it's their turn. They get to report on whatever it was when they finished doing the work on that, but we will have gotten them in motion to do their next level of work. And I actually don't think we have to give them the annual charge. I mean, they may say, give us a topic and an issue, and we'll churn that out in 3 or 4 months with insight and recommendations for you all on it. And so they actually, I think, can serve in a more functional advisory role than they have. But I think the big thing is that we're really on the fence on 2 of these advisory committees that we haven't brought up to you yet, which was ACE and HRASC. And then to the point on Title I and FCPS, maybe it's something that would exploring a little bit more with what Dahlia had said, but I'm kind of in the camp with Ms. Schultz. I mean, I'd love to add some other topics that I frankly think are so mission critical to the work we do. Early childhood education is, and I frankly think it shouldn't be just an advisory committee. I think it's something we have to be talking every year. And I would welcome them, Ms. Fairfax, coming to our annual work session conversation on where are we on early childhood education, and then they could, speak to us then.
Okay, I have Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Mr. Anna Fairfax, and hopefully after that, I would like to be able to somehow wrap up our discussion and see whether we can, go back to our respective advisory committees for their feedback based upon our discussion. Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Megan, you make an excellent segue into what I wanted to talk about, which was that I think it is a good idea to prune down the size of some of these advisory committees because that is an issue. But I don't think you get rid of the advisory committee as much as you structure it in a way that it makes sure that it's meaningful and productive work. And along those lines, one of the things that was very effective last year for the Advanced Academics Advisory was working with another advisory committee. And I think that we should look at how we can have multiple advisory committees working together to work on strategic priorities for the system. So maybe rather than focusing on the committee structures, we really should be looking at when we give the committees a charge for the next year or 18 months, being very strategic in the charge that we give them, and identify where we expect them to be working with another committee, and making sure that that other committee is also identified and told that they're expected to work together. Because I think that sharing subject matter expertise across committees can be very beneficial for the work that gets done. And your staff liaison comment, I think, is appropriate, because we do ask our teachers to do so much, and attending yet another meeting at night is something that is a stress for some of them. So,
Okay, Mr. Fairfax.
Forgot what I was going to say. No. Oh, just kidding. You had to be paying attention to understand that. No, I didn't. What I was going to ask you is and I know we had talked about this at the last work session as kind of going down the path that Dahlia was, about looking at these committees and seeing where you can kind of put them in alignment with the strategic plan, and focusing in on having them advise, based upon that. Kind of like, what you were saying about strategic priorities and partnering, because it was evident to us about 2 years ago that FCPS Head Start was coming in line with what Title I was. And rather than thinking that that was a disservice or repetitive, it was kind of like, yeah, they're seeing the same problems. They're not necessarily, because one was parental engagement and the other one was, more the program in itself. So if you haven't looked at that, I think we talked about that, correct? Or, looking to see how the current advisory committee structure can be, divided into where the 4 years of the strategic plan, how we could work from there. And then if you gradually needed to change them after that point,
Okay, thank you. Governance committee did not really have, time to, think through a standing committee, restructuring of a standing committee along the line of a strategic plan, and also work with advisory committee. We just did not have a time to do that. So with that, could I make these suggestions to the individual board liaisons, to the advisory committees? I don't know when your committees generally meet. According to a timeline we adopted, we were supposed to, come back in April at the April work session and brief the full board and further feedback from advisory committees, and have a discussion in May at the work session, so that we can make a decision in June timeframe. That's the timeline. So whether you can go back and to talk about the reporting timeline, limiting to 2 committee reports per night, whether annual charge has to be annual charge, or it could be as number as whenever they are ready and they present the report, whether these reports can be presented in phases rather than doing it all at the same time, June or July timeframe. Committee membership composition. What do advisory committees themselves feel about the committee membership? Sometimes, advisory committees do have problems meeting the quorum because there's a large membership size and not enough, members showing up for the meeting. That, some of the advisory committees, there are some board members saying that we may not need those committees to report to the full board, and there's other, we have some disagreements on some of the issues, but you can go back and share with them. There are, we haven't, our board has not decided on anything yet, but these are some of the things the board discussed, and get their feedback and be prepared to present the feedback at the full day work session in April. Hopefully, Madam Chair, you can feel, governance committee.
You're talking about, I was putting down that you want it to be in May. You want
No,
governance.
April for
April.
feedback
Right.
and have actual discussion in May.
Okay,
Because I don't think that we can do whole thing at the one work session.
Okay.
Meanwhile, governance committee will work on a standing committee. Yes.
So are we maybe looking at, for this year, the questions you asked are more related around, it seems like keeping the committees the way they are, but changing the reports, looking at membership, looking at the charge, and perhaps looking at structure later?
That's for the full board to decide.
Okay,
But we're leaving an option open for making changes implemented from July, or board has an option not to do anything. But since the board adopted the timeline to follow, to have this discussion, that I'm asking you to go back to your advisory committee and share with them board's discussion and get their,
Right,
their
so
input.
Just to clarify, you're not giving maybe a few options we're choosing from. This is back to our committees again, sharing what we shared today and getting their input again to share.
They may say no to everything we said, or they may say, oh, that's a great idea, we don't need to exist.
Could we get a summary, I guess, of what we're talking about? Okay.
I think Madam Clerk will give you the summary points of discussion. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify for Dahlia. I think what Mr. Moon's saying is, in the end, the 12 of us will decide how many committees are we keeping, who's going to report to us, who's going to go to Dr. Garza, and that's not requiring necessarily the advisory committee input. What is, it's asking them, how do you feel about doing this work that you do for us differently? And that can be things like, you're not going to all report now at the first week in June. Your committee structure of 30 people or more may not have to look like that. I mean, those are the key things that I feel like we've introduced it to them, but now we need to tell them, look, governance has looked at this and is really serious about trying to say, how can we make the work you do impactful and meaningful? And so you got to be starting to bring back definitive positions so that we as a board can hear from each one of the committees. I like the idea of paring it down. No, absolutely not. Please don't. But I mean, right now, I don't think we all have that clarity. And ideally, Mr. Moon, I'd like to see that as we introduce it, have our committees actually say, if we did that, what would that look like for your committee? So that we could even come back and I'm the liaison to MSCOC. I could come back to all of you guys and I'd say, they liked that idea. And here's how they thought we could pare this down.
Sure. And I'll go a little further on, committee restructuring. Final decision will be made by the school board, but there has been suggestions to, send ACE to the staff, changing HRAC to Human Resources Advisory Committee. I mean, not that we agree to do that, but share with the advisory committees that there has been some discussion, suggestion about and how they react to that. Okay. So with that, I will see you again at the April work session. Thank you.